And welcome back to Consumer Choice Radio, broadcasting here on Sauga 960 AM and the Big Talker 1067 FM in Wilmington, North Carolina. We have the pleasure of speaking with someone who understands a lot about the impact of COVID restrictions in his state. We're speaking with Mr. Theodore or Ted Mitzlaff. You know him, maybe you might have seen his name pop up as the CEO of Goodwood Brewing Company out there in Louisville, Kentucky. Ted, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we wanted to have you on because we saw this lawsuit that came across the transom from our friends at the Pacific Legal Foundation. There have been a couple of these, and it seems as if you've taken issue with some of the emergency powers that were enforced by the Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, who is a Democrat, and this relates to all of the COVID-19 related policies and restrictions. If we can just get your sort of we'll say intent and why you wanted to get into this, how specifically you've been hurt, and what many of our listeners might not know about some of the restrictions that were enforced there in Louisville or throughout Kentucky.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the last thing I wanted to do is pick a fight with the governor. That's certainly not my intention. I just want to run a business and provide for my employees. The first bill, well, let me go back. Our governor went way above and beyond the CDC recommendations. He shut down all food and beverage establishments for months. When we did open, it was 25%, and then 30%, and then 50%, and then he shut us down again for really no apparent reason. Of course, all the big box stores were still open. You had 1,000 people in a Home Depot, but you couldn't have 50 people in a restaurant. So it was crazy. When the House legislature started back up in January, their first bill, HB1, was to overrule Beshear's executive orders, basically take them away so we could follow the CDC guidelines. It passed the House 74-21, passed the Senate 29-8. So overwhelmingly, the House and Senate opposed Beshear's executive orders. Governor Beshear vetoed this bill. His veto was subsequently overridden. So then he took the bill took a lawsuit and filed a lawsuit in Franklin County, where he has a judge, Philip Shepard, that pretty much does whatever he wants him to do. So we have a single judge who's overruling the will of the people, the will of the Senate and the House, who said Beshear gets his executive orders in perpetuity. So all I'm doing is filing a suit in the adjacent county, in Scott County, to say, no, we're going to follow the state constitution, and we're going to open back up safely with following CDC guidelines. The way it's affected our economy has been really beyond measure. We've had over 30% of all of our bars and restaurants fail. We've had a huge ripple effect. All the suppliers to those industries are suffering. We had, for instance, in my business, I have 3 restaurants. So those restaurants obviously were closed, and now we're at 60%, even though our infection rate is extremely low, and it continues to drop for the 10th straight week. But then you also have, in my business, I distribute beer. So not only are my restaurants affected, but all of my clients are affected. So from a distribution standpoint, that's been terrible as well. We were in 16 states prior to the COVID shutdowns, including the great state of North Carolina. And now we are in 8 with beer distribution. So it has certainly affected our company in a significant way.
And so on the restaurant front, and I know this has happened in other jurisdictions where legislators have shut down restaurants and the industry has basically said, well, show us the proof that we are where people are getting or are transmitting the virus or giving it to other people. Was there any evidence given from the governor's office to say, well, there's actually a risk with the CDC guidelines and restaurants aren't operating safely? Or is there no evidence? I mean, I'm assuming there's very little, but maybe you can speak to some of the efforts that business owners and restaurants were doing to ensure that people stayed safe while staying open.
Yeah, not only was there no evidence, but the rules that he was putting in place were ridiculous. We couldn't sit inside a restaurant, but you could sit inside a tent outside as long as you were inside the tent, which made no sense. So the restaurants that had good air circulation, good sanitization, we couldn't utilize that space. We had to spend tens of thousands of dollars, which we did, to put tents outside at two of our establishments. Now there's no bar seating. You can sit at a table at a bar, but you can't sit at a bar. So it makes zero sense. And of course, you've heard now Fauci saying, well, it's not 6 feet necessarily, it's 3 feet. So what is it? It just the rules continue to change. I get it. It was a new pandemic. They didn't have a lot of evidence initially, but they do now. Now they have it. Now we know it's safe to open. The restaurant industry has gone way above and beyond as far as the measures we take. We've always taken extreme measures to make sure our clients are safe. But now we're going to additional measures with sanitizing tables, wearing the face masks. We are in compliance, taking temperature of clients as they come in, and we're fine with all that. We want our clients to be safe, but to have an arbitrary curfew, it just makes no sense. I guess COVID only comes out after midnight.
Well, it's funny you say that because when the UK first did their curfew, there was an image. I think it was Piccadilly Circus or one of the major train stations, and it was jammed because everybody had to leave the restaurants at 10. And then it was like, uh-oh, we've basically created this mass gathering by virtue of trying to get people out of bars and restaurants by a certain time. And so I've always found that puzzling. Like, what justification is there to say that all of a sudden the restaurant is, I guess, more irresponsible after 10 p.m.? Is that the argument? Or
yeah, if you can bring some type of reasoning to any of these arguments, I'm all ears, but I haven't heard them yet.
Yeah, there's plenty that's going to be debated, I know, in the courtroom. And I wanted to ask about that. This lawsuit hinges on the emergency powers. And this is something that has not just in Kentucky. We've seen similar suits or legislation in places like North Carolina. California is going through this. They even have a recall of their governor. I don't know if that's possible in Kentucky, but that's probably something you'd be leading the charge with. But I'm wondering, with the emergency powers, is that something that is being debated? Are there other industries that are coming to you where you have a different, perhaps legal experts who are saying, hey, you actually do have a case here. This has gone far beyond what a governor should be allowed to do, especially considering the legislature has put forward their own bill to try to overturn this.
Yeah, interestingly, I've had a number of other bars and restaurants tell me they back me 100%, but they're all scared to death to put their name on the lawsuit, put their head on the chopping block. And I can assure you, we've taken plenty of arrows. My poor gal who heads our marketing, reads all the hate on social media. People are real brave when they're standing behind their laptop. But the fact is, it's the right thing to do. We're trying to basically support the Constitution of Kentucky, and I think it's ludicrous that a single judge has the ability to dictate policy for the entire state when the state legislature overwhelmingly passed a bill to open the state. Moreover, our adjacent states, Indiana and Tennessee, they're open. They're open for business. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, which borders Indiana. You can go over to the bars and restaurants in Indiana. That they love Governor Beshear's lockdowns because it's great for their business.
I have another follow-up question about the pandemic and how that's impacted the alcohol sector and the restaurant industry. Across North America, we've seen state governments, provincial governments, local governments peel back some very outdated rules. So like one example was the ability to deliver alcohol with food, which in many jurisdictions was not allowed. Are you seeing any of those changes in Kentucky? Has COVID brought on maybe some of the repealing of those nanny state laws, or is Kentucky lagging behind when we compare it to other states?
We've seen some loosening of some of the regulations. We were allowed to sell drinks by the glass. We were allowed to deliver alcohol with food. So some of those onerous restrictions have been lifted, which is great. They just passed a rule that allows self-distribution of breweries at a very small level, up to 2,500 barrels per year, which a keg, as you think of a big keg, it's a half barrel. So it really helps some of the small breweries that frankly were devastated by this, and it enables them to self-distribute at a small level just to try to stay alive.
Oh, that's a very welcome reform. I know that specifically in North Carolina that they've had that limit changed, arbitrarily every couple of years, but it's trending upward, which is always a good thing. Uh, so we're speaking with Ted Mitzlaff. Uh, Definitely an interesting case here. We're going to link to it on our show notes, consumerchoiceradio.com. You guys can see that, and I think there's somewhat of a movement, as I mentioned before, that is happening everywhere when it comes to the ongoing restrictions, to how governors are responding, to how legislatures are responding. I have one question I'd like to ask just about the industry and its future. We chatted previously on the program about your last name Mitzlaff and German heritage. Obviously, the Germans brought the great beer traditions to America, set up great Biergartens everywhere. What is sort of COVID and COVID compliance going to mean for the future of breweries? I know breweries are a huge industry in many different states, certainly North Carolina, definitely Ontario and Florida. I mean, almost every single state and place across North America. What will these kind of restrictions or fear of COVID pending, 100% vaccination mean for industries like yours?
Well, it's very impactful. Most breweries have a tap room, so obviously they want to draw people into those tap rooms to serve. That's where we get our highest margin, when we're selling our own beer out of our own taps. In my Louisville facility, we're at about 30% of our pre-COVID revenues. So it has really impacted our Louisville facility. Downtown Louisville as a whole has been decimated by COVID in the hospitality industry. Of course, for those of us that are distributing our beer, as I mentioned earlier, if the bars and restaurants are closed early, and if they're at 50% capacity, 60% capacity, whatever the limits and restrictions are, that's hugely impactful. And people say, well, you can sell it people are buying it in liquor stores, which is somewhat true. They are buying, more canned and bottled beer, but that's also our lowest margin product. So while your volume in certain areas may be stable or even increase a little bit, it's your lowest margin. So our highest margin is draft, our highest margin is out of our tap rooms, and those are the areas that they're most dramatically impacted. And they expect the same, about 15 to 20% of all craft breweries around the country to fail. In fact, we're closing on a deal, hopefully today, to acquire a location in Indianapolis, Indiana, a company that went under, and I want a more business-friendly environment, frankly, than what I'm getting in Kentucky.
And on that kind of beer freedom index side of things, where are some states who handle the industry from your view appropriately? Because I know that different states have different rules. From a consumer perspective, I mean, you look at a state like Pennsylvania, which looks like it's just getting out of prohibition, and then you have states who are maybe a little more open and free. Who's doing it right? Who's figured it out?
Historically, North Carolina obviously has had tremendous benefits for craft breweries and breweries going there, which is why you guys have become sort of the craft beer mecca of the eastern United States. I mean, Asheville is just fantastic, and then other areas, the Raleigh-Durham area, a lot of great breweries coming out of North Carolina. Similarly, Michigan was very progressive with their laws that favored craft breweries, and you've seen several great breweries come out of Michigan. Same with Colorado. But the converse now in some of those states like Michigan that have been extremely onerous on their COVID restrictions, it's been devastating to the industry as a whole. So it'll be very interesting to see who survives, who's able to weather this. The PPP helps some, It helped our production because we have payroll, significant payroll in production. But most bars and restaurants, they're not paying. Their payrolls are pretty small. So the basing relief on one's payroll really didn't help the restaurant industry that much.
We've been speaking with Ted Mitzlaff. He is CEO at Goodwood Brewing, and they have the good sense of having goodwood.beer as their domain. Beautiful. Ted, thanks so much for coming on Consumer Choice Radio, and best of luck in your case.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me.